From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
It was a heated volley between Governor Lincoln Chafee and the men that want his job. Chafee lashing out at anyone who thinks Rhode Island shouldn't pay back the 38 Studios bond.
I think any governor, a candidate for governor that doesn't see these two truths is really unfit to serve here.
Unfit to serve? That's a strong statement, Governor.
Absolutely. I feel very strongly about this.
A direct shot at Republican gubernatorial candidates Alan Fung and Ken Block.
38 Studios went under while Governor Chafee was the governor, and he didn't do anything about it. He didn't warn us.
The 38 Studios debate re-enters the governor's race, plus an inside look at one campaign's polling data in the Republican primary. Our guest this week on Newsmakers, GOP candidate for governor, Ken Block. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Ken Block, welcome back to the program. It's good to have you.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
All right, let's start with 38 Studios. As I pointed out there, you oppose repaying the 38 Studios bond. Ken, you're a businessman. You own and operate a software company. What happens if your business took out a huge loan and decides not to repay it?
We would be in big trouble with our lenders and many other things. But when we sign for a loan, especially the company my size, I sign personal liability and personal obligations to pay it. On these obligations that Rhode Island signed for, right on the front of them it says these are not debt obligations of the Rhode Island taxpayer, and they are not beholden to pay these loans back. So there's a gigantic difference in the type of loan that we're talking about here.
Yes, but you can't guarantee, if you become governor, you cannot guarantee a different outcome for Rhode Island. You can't say there won't be a negative impact from investors, from Wall Street, can you?
Right now, it is very much unknown whether it's going to be, whether there will be an impact or not. We've heard voices on both sides argue that there will be or that there won't be. For me, this comes down to a very simple set of problems. The state is suing almost everybody involved in the underwriting of these bonds for wrongdoing in the issuance of these bonds, for misrepresenting and doing worse in terms of painting the picture of what this was like. And I believe that the right thing to do to protect the taxpayers' interest is to not pay these bonds until we know whether these bonds were issued and done in a forthright way, or whether there was legal problems with the whole underpinning of how this was done.
But isn't that reckless to suggest proposing not paying, you have a known cost of paying the $12.5 million in this year's budget, and you have a frankly unknown impact at the other end. You admit that even the people saying it's going to be a catastrophe admit they don't know either.
Right. We don't know right now, and I know there's a lot more people searching around trying to figure it out. But from my perspective, what I believe Wall Street is doing is double dipping. I believe that the Wall Street insiders in this case, they're getting an enhanced interest rate on these bonds because they knew there was enhanced risk. They were so concerned about the risk attached with this deal that they had the Senate President and the Speaker verbally commit on a conference call that their personal assurance, which they can't give, by the way, that the state would commit to paying these bonds. That's how nervous the bond industry was about the stability and the ability and willingness of the state to repay these bonds. And now we find ourselves in a situation where it all went bad. Everybody knew there was risk. There's already enhanced risk and interest built into these bonds. And I think we have to let this process play out a good distance more to figure out what the right thing is to do.
We hear so frequently, though, that one of Rhode Island's problems is its reputation, is the fact that it ranks so low in terms of business rankings. And the day after we decide not to pay that bond, the General Assembly decides not to, the headlines in Bond Buyer, in Bloomberg, in the Financial Times, in the Wall Street Journal are going to say, Rhode Island chooses not to pay on a bond. And I'm sure they'll report on the debate about moral obligation and everything, but in the end there's going to be a story about Rhode Island, that weird state with high unemployment, now doesn't even pay what looks like its debts. I mean, isn't that a risk as well?
All of these are valid concerns and risks. We need to move down the road, though, and we need to pay attention, and we need to ask the questions, and we need to be prepared to take a hardline stance. We have to be prepared to do this.
But it just feels like to me the hardline stance is because you're running a campaign, and it's easy for you to say right now you're not in a position where you can actually pull the trigger on any of this anyway. And yeah, 38 Studios is really unpopular. I'm sure the polling data shows that. So isn't this just a sort of a campaign thing to go out there and say?
No, not at all. This is an absolutely moral thing. Look, the people of this state have lost faith and trust in their elected officials, and 38 Studios is a prime example of why that's happened. And what they want is accountability. What they want to know is that there are going to be elected officials who keep their interests in mind first and foremost. And we're not getting that. And we haven't gotten that for a long time out of our elected officials. The voices of Rhode Island are getting tired of it. I hear it every day on the campaign trail. What we need to do is we need to force the accountability. We need to hold the bond industry up here because they understood this risk all the way along. And by the way, the only way these bonds can get done as moral obligation bonds is if they are not the responsibility of the Rhode Island taxpayer. They cannot be legally obligated to pay these bonds and have them be moral obligation bonds.
You said earlier this week, if you become governor, Rhode Island won't float any more moral obligation bonds. But we don't actually float that many moral obligation bonds. I looked at the state audit. It cites these 38 Studios bonds and Rhode Island Housing's bonds. And I want to understand, are you saying that's just about moral obligation bonds, or are you saying if you become governor, you will not allow any borrowing that doesn't go to voter referendum?
No. It's moral obligation bonds specifically, okay? These bonds that benefit private industry, that skirt taxpayer scrutiny are bad. When they're revenue backed, like airport bonds and other types of issuances like that, those are fine, okay? Revenue bonds issued by our quasis are okay. But this particular type of deal, the straight up moral obligation bond with very high risk to benefit specific industries, what we've learned is that the insiders who do these deals don't have the taxpayers' best interests in mind, and we have to stop that.
So certificates of participation, those capital lease bonds where we promise we're going to pay X amount over time, those would continue if you were governor?
Those, as long as they're backed by stable and known revenue streams, as opposed to something that is done on an investment banker risk, especially on an unknown startup. This type of reckless investment with taxpayer dollars has to be put in front of the taxpayers. We can't trust
but
government
for certificates of participation in revenue stream is General Assembly appropriation every year, which is exactly what the 38 Studios bonds are.
Those are revenue backed, though, correct? Those are they're essentially tax anticipation bonds, correct?
They are a promise that the General Assembly will make a payment each year on a capital lease.
But with what faith and credit behind it? I believe it's with the future tax collections. Is that correct?
No, it's just a promise in the appropriation, I believe, based on the fact that General Assembly says we're going to continue to make those.
I would need to understand a little bit more about those bonds to classify which way they go, but I can tell you that the Airport Corporation appropriations, those types of bonds, which are backed by their revenues and that sort of thing, those absolutely need to continue to happen, and there's a purpose for those. And there's stability in those bonds, too.
All right, we're going to shift gears. Your campaign released an internal poll to us. And I want to note that you released the entire poll so we could see the numbers, order of questions, and so on, and that is enormously important when digesting this data. In a thumbnail, sort of the headline for us is it shows of the 300 likely Republican primary voters, you're leading Cranston Mayor Alan Fung, your opponent, 46-37, with 16% undecided. This would be a shift from an internal poll that you conducted in October, which shows you were actually losing to Alan Fung then. So you've gained a lead according to this poll.
Correct.
Look, we know what the Fung campaign's going to say. They're going to question the science, right? They might even come to us and say, hey, we have another internal poll that shows our guy is in the lead. So why should anyone take any faith in these numbers?
Well, for our purposes, what these polls are very important scientific measurements of where we have been and where we are going. We're using them. These aren't push polls. The questions weren't designed that way. We did a pretty big sample. We talked to 300 likely Republican primary voters, both Republicans.
100 less than your October poll, though.
That's true. So, but really, there were many more questions in this poll. I don't know if you caught that.
No, it's a long poll. So
it was a big poll,
yeah.
And we do have to be fiscally responsible here in this campaign. The margin of error is certainly low enough with the sample of 300. What was important to us was really understanding how our message was resonating. It was important for us to understand where the voters' sentiments were as opposed to where they were 6 months ago. And what we wanted to really know is what we have been doing working? Is it being received by the voters well inside the Republican primary? And the answer for all of those questions is a really resounding yes.
So the margin of error here was, just to point out, I believe 5.66.
Correct.
The poll, one thing sort of interested me, it showed that creating jobs and improving the economy, when you asked, is number one. But what moved to the second spot was eliminating corruption. This shouldn't be of any surprise to anyone because the poll happened late April, and this was after those dramatic raids. What can a governor do to eliminate corruption?
Well, the first most important issue is are the candidates for governor, are they insiders or are they outsiders? I believe that Rhode Islanders are looking for a completely different and fresh perspective for the next person to be governor at this point. We've seen what insider politics does to us. We watch as the results of the 38 studios manifest itself. We watch as the insiders really kind of tease us and drag us along with, are we going to get rid of the master lever or are we not? You know, we're playing this guessing game with the Senate now. Will they or won't they? We have 51 years of history that says that they probably won't, but we also have an electorate now who's really up in arms about this. They want responsive government, and we haven't gotten it for a long time. The politics as usual in this state is killing us. That's what this poll tells us. And the crisis that we suffer from, the economic crisis that we're all withering under right now, is overwhelmingly pushing voters to look for answers and solutions. They want someone who's just going to make these problems get better.
Why release the poll publicly? Most campaigns don't release their internal polls publicly, though sometimes some do, and I'm not saying no one ever does. Did you feel the need to show the Republican electorate or influential people in the party that you can get into the lead in this race?
Well, we are in the lead in this race, and we moved the polls 34 points. Between the October results and where we are right now. I mean, that's a substantial movement. And what it shows is that the message is getting through, that the plans, the solid, concrete proposals that we have to fix what's broken here, people can put their heads around them. And I think more, for me, as I'm talking to people all over the state, the thing that I hear over and over again is just fix it, please. We give up, right? We can't take this anymore.
One thing you hear from Funk supporters, it sometimes sounds like they want to explode at the idea someone who has admitted he voted for Obama in both 08 and 12 could possibly defeat a person who's been a Republican for at least a decade or so in the Republican primary. I mean, did you test that question in this poll? Have you looked at whether Republican voters feel?
We talked to 300 likely Republican primary voters who said overwhelmingly that's not a consideration for them. The answer is in this poll.
All right, Ken, when we come back, I want to hit up a couple of issues that you had on your website, particularly focused on the state budget and your $1 billion claim. And I know we've talked about this. I think last time you were on the show, we talked to you about $1 billion, that you can save $1 billion. But it is, when we say you're coming on the show, it's the number one question Ted and I get. So we want to explore that again.
They want us to find the vault where the billion is and open it.
Yeah. Let's walk out.
All right, we're going to take a break here on Newsmakers. Our guest, of course, is Republican candidate for Governor Ken Block. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is Republican gubernatorial candidate Ken Block. Ken, you always talk about the claim of saving $1 billion over 4 years, correct? If you were to become governor. $1 billion sounds like a big old shiny number. How do you get to that figure over 4 years?
$1 billion is a start. Okay, what that number represents is the ability to take what's happened to us in this state and fix it. What we have done is we priced ourselves out of the market in terms of a place to do business.
Give me the big price tag saving on $1 billion.
So, all right, the way it breaks down, you want to get right into it. So we're going to get right into the math. Okay. They keep telling me not to get into the math.
Get into the math. This is the show to do it.
All right. So the bottom line here is we will find $1/3 billion of savings in unemployment insurance costs. We have one of the nation's worst-ranked unemployment insurance systems.
That's federal money, though, isn't it?
No. Every year I pay money as a business owner into unemployment insurance. I pay for every employee. In fact, in Rhode Island, the high-end employers, the ones who use it more than anyone else, pay $2,000 per employee per year. That's their cost as Rhode Island employers per employee into the fund. I'm at the low end, but I'm still paying several $100s, I believe, into the fund for every employee. That works for me. And this is very, very high relative to the rest of the country, and it's for some very specific reasons that other states have fixed and we haven't. When we make that change, we estimate, and we can only estimate, but we estimate that that number will approach $80 million a year, every year repeating, when we fix this problem. And by the way, Rhode Island companies are also paying penalties to the federal government because our program has been so poorly run, and we had to borrow money from the federal government and we haven't paid it back.
I guess my question about the federal money thing was, when you say you can save $1 billion over 4 years, we're not talking out of the $8 billion operating budget from the state of Rhode Island, correct?
I believe we're going to find $1/3 billion from inside the budget.
Okay.
Okay. 2/3 comes from outside the budget. The other $1/3 billion comes from temporary disability insurance. And I'm just going to give you a couple of quick statistics. We are one of the most expensive temporary disability insurance markets in the country. In fact, 45 other states you can buy temporary disability insurance for half of what it costs here in the private marketplace. The reason that our temporary disability insurance is so expensive is that there's overuse of the fund, and we can prove it in the percentages that come out. 7.5% of Rhode Islanders file new claims every year for on average 12 weeks. That's gigantic utilization. It means we either have the sickest workforce in the world or there's something fundamentally broken with the program. It's a $160 million program. When we cut the cost of this program in half, which I know we can do because most other states have done it, that's $80 million a year. That's $1/3 billion over 4 years. That's $2/3 billion just looking at one place. Other places that we can find efficiencies. Rhode Island is one of, I don't know how many other states do this, but Rhode Island can't afford this anymore. Most of our state employees fill out a paper-based time card every week.
How big a savings is that going to be?
We think it's $10 to $20 million.
A year?
A year.
All right.
Recurring.
So I want to, staying with the budget, your website says you want to reduce the sales tax to border communities by creating a sales tax zone, and that's literally all I could find on your website was that one line talking about that. But I'm just curious, with just that little bit of information, by creating a sales tax zone for border communities, aren't you just creating more border communities further in the state? Like, make East Providence happy, but tick off Cranston?
I am very much in favor of lowering taxes whenever we can do so responsibly and not create bigger budget problems than we have right now. My biggest operating long-term goal is the coming budget deficit 5 years out, which begins to approach $500 million. Okay? Everything that we do has to be done to improve that long-term scenario and bring that budget deficit down. With the sales tax decrease that's being proposed right now, I'm not personally convinced that we can do so and not cause a big budgetary problem.
Yeah, but,
so
but answer the question on the border community. Aren't you just creating more border communities?
So what I'm saying is, if we're going to go on an adventure looking at the sales tax, I think we should do so in an isolated place. And we should prove the concept. Will the consumers come from Massachusetts and spend their money in a border community and have the resulting economic increase in economic activity pay for the decrease? What I'm suggesting is, if we're going to do this, let's do it in an isolated experiment and quantify the results.
But wouldn't it hurt towns that don't get the benefit of
depending
that
on
lower?
If we did it in Woonsocket, I think that what you're suggesting, the effect on other communities would be somewhat limited because we're really fairly geographically isolated in Rhode Island terms for Woonsocket.
We're really
relative.
small.
I mean, we're really small. But again, of all the taxes that I would decrease right now, I'm not looking at the sales tax as a prime one to do because I think that there's far bigger impacts.
All right, but this was on the homepage of your website.
Understood.
Okay,
and what should have been on there
is not like you're hiding it, but it's predominantly displayed.
But this is, if we're going to go down that road, I don't propose going whole hog for the whole state because every 1% we lower is more than a $100 million hit to the budget. And I don't know if we can, nobody can say for sure whether we're going to see that kind of economic activity that comes along with a decrease in the sales tax.
Briefly on taxes still, Speaker Mattiello is pushing for a reduction in the corporate and or the estate taxes this session. He wants to get those done. Do you agree with prioritizing those? What do you think of that?
I'm sorry, which taxes again?
Corporate and estate.
I agree with both of those. Those both need to be done. For us to be a magnet for larger businesses, we need to be more competitive regionally on the corporate tax. Right now, we're on the upper end in our region. If we can get to 7% or lower, we are now aggressive in terms of the region, and you have to have these basic facts in mind when you go. I call it the death tax, and the estate tax, there's a gigantic basic problem with our structure of our tax here. It's very different from a lot of other states. We have a cliff effect, which really unfairly impacts people when they die. Once they cross the threshold, there's a gigantic tax hit.
The estate tax threshold, not the threshold of death.
Not the threshold of death, right. And thank you for clarifying. and we are losing high net worth individuals. We see it. You talk to every single financial planner out there, and what they'll tell you is it's financial malpractice on their part if they don't advise their high net worth customers to set themselves up to not die as Rhode Island residents. And that's a shame in every level because it affects our philanthropy. There's so many negative impacts to it. People love this state. They want to be here. They want to participate. I don't want to necessarily say they want to die here, who wants to die, but the reality is I think people who are here want to be here and they want to live their lives out here, but we've set ourselves up in a way that makes it really hard for people to do that, and we have to change that dynamic.
When you created the Moderate Party, the idea was to focus on policy issues. You had the E's, education, employment, so on and so forth, not social issues. That you thought that distracted from what was wrong with Rhode Island. What about now? You're a Republican. Is your philosophy to still avoid social issues?
The most important problems that face our society in Rhode Island right now are economic and educational. We know that empirically. We know that in every possible measurable way. We are suffering from the highest unemployment rate in this country. You walk down the street, you talk to people, and they will tell you that they are hurting, and they will tell you they're worried about the educations that their kids are getting, and will tell you no matter where they are socioeconomically, we might have to leave.
But social issues
crisis.
are very important to your voters, the people that would vote you in for the primary. You're going to ignore those concerns?
They are, for me, in this moment in urgency of crisis right now, they are not the most important issues in any way, shape, or form.
Are you pro-choice or pro-life?
I'm pro-choice.
And should the state legalize recreational use of marijuana as they did in Colorado?
The governor of Colorado told everybody, you better go slow because we are seeing some unexpected consequences here. I'm going to take the governor of Colorado's advice, and we need to go very slow and learn some lessons from what's happened over there. We need to ask this question a year or two out once we can quantify and understand what's happened in Colorado.
Have you ever smoked marijuana?
I tried once and I threw up.
You threw up?
Yes.
That's
fair enough.
Unusual answer to that.
You've been a big campaigner for repealing the master lever. We don't have time to do the entire debate on this show. People can tune in on House Judiciary or Senate Judiciary. But I'm just curious, what's your short version of what will actually change if it's repealed? What do you think will be the effect?
The most important effect, but bar none, is it will stop the injustice that happens in down-ticket races. In down-ticket races, nonpartisan school committee and town committee races, where you're not allowed to run as Republicans or Democrats, you just run as individuals. When people use the master lever, they often don't realize that they have to vote separately in those down-ticket races. It's called undervoting. It's well documented. It's almost a third of master lever votes result in undervotes in those nonpartisan races, and that disenfranchises voters and candidates regardless of party. And it's absolutely broken. It's absolutely wrong. The master lever is an artifact of the 1950s. It has no business being on our ballot now, and the fact that we can't get rid of it is one of the things that I think really aggravates the average person, because there is no good reason to keep it, not when the vast majority of other states have gotten rid of it. And it's like a poke in the eye. It's a poke to the collective eye of Rhode Island when our elected leaders ignore the wishes of the electorate to make a simple, good government reform. We have never seen a better chance to get it passed this time. The Senate President is under a lot of pressure, and she'll be under much more pressure as we get close to the end. And I would encourage everybody here to go to www.masterlever.org and send the Senate President a letter asking her to help get rid of the master lever and bring it up for a vote.
Have you spoken to her about it?
I haven't spoken to her in this session about it.
You have said the master lever has been documented to, quote, disenfranchise undereducated and minority voters. So what about other issues that could address that? For instance, why not push for early voting, same-day voter registration? Do you support those?
I think same-day voter registration is something that I would not support.
Why?
We have 90-day voter disaffiliation right now to participate in the primary. So we have to have consistent policies in terms of how we conduct our elections. And what we seem to be favoring right now in our existing policy is longer lead times to get things done. If we're going to go in and we're going to look at across the board how our electoral laws are put together, we can do that. But in this particular circumstance, I believe that we have existing laws in place to manage and to make sure as best as we can that only people who are eligible and to vote are actually voting right now. And I think it's important to keep that integrity as much as we can.
If you were elected governor, you'd be the first Republican governor since Don Carcieri. Have you spoken to Governor Carcieri about your campaign?
I haven't yet. When I declared my candidacy, he was out of state, and I think he's only recently getting back now.
And would you seek his endorsement? Would you accept his endorsement if you are the Republican nominee?
We have not asked for any endorsements of any type at this point. We're making our case. We're putting out all of our plans. I will talk to everybody and anybody about my plans to fix this state, the campaign, and how we want to do things. And as we talk to people and they want to offer their support, we will gladly accept it.
30 seconds left. If Alan Fung wins the primary, will you support him?
I will.
Okay. All right. Ken Block, thank you very much for joining us on the program. And
Thank you.
we have a debate coming up.
I'm so looking forward to it.
I'll bet. June 17th is the Republican primary debate right here live on Channel 12. It's an hour long. The week prior to that, we're going to be doing a Democratic primary debate with the 3 candidates in that race. So be sure to watch that. It's at 7 o'clock right here on Channel 12. I want to thank our guest, Republican candidate for governor, Ken Block, for joining us. If you missed any of it, it's online, WPRI.com. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers. Okay, we're going to go upstairs.